Why do we spend our lives chasing money we'll never have time to enjoy? Why do we waste years trying to impress people we don't even like? Why do we follow unwritten rules set by a society just as lost as we are? Why do we keep moving forward when we know death is waiting either way? Wake up, commute, work, eat, sleep, repeat, day after day, month after month, year after year. And then one morning, you're brushing your teeth, staring at your own reflection, and something in you breaks through the noise. A question rises, uninvited, but undeniable. What's the point of all this? It doesn't come with rage. It doesn't come with tears. It comes with stillness, the kind that leaves you staring at the walls of your life and wondering who built them. For a long time, you were too busy to ask, too distracted, too responsible. But now, the question won't go away. Camus called this moment a rupture, when the veil slips, when the rhythm of daily life collides with the raw, terrifying clarity of existence itself. This isn't a breakdown. It's not weakness. It's awakening. And once it begins, you can't return to sleep. There was a time when people didn't wonder whether life had meaning, because they were already told it did. You were born into a story that explained everything. Why you were here, why you suffered, where you were going. Pain was never just pain. It was a test. Loss wasn't just tragedy. It was part of a divine plan. Even death wasn't the end, but the beginning of something eternal. Religion didn't just offer comfort. It gave structure to life. It turned chaos into order. It made the unknown feel familiar, because someone somewhere had already written the script, and that script mattered. If you were suffering, there was a reason. If you were poor, you were still seen. If you lost everything in this world, there was still a place waiting for you in the next. That's what belief gave people. Not just hope, but orientation. A way to make sense of a world that so often doesn't. When your heart broke, faith told you it wasn't in vain. When life collapsed, it reminded you that heaven was still intact. You could keep going, because none of it was random. There was purpose, there was meaning, there was God. And that belief shaped everything. It shaped how people lived, how they loved, how they endured, and more importantly, how they suffered. Because when pain has meaning, it becomes survivable. But when the world starts to change, when doubt begins to replace certainty, when the old answers start to sound like silence, that's when something inside begins to fracture. You still feel pain, you still face loss, but the story that once held those things is no longer there. You begin to feel like the suffering is just suffering. The loss is just loss, and death, now it feels final. Faith used to be the bridge between life's cruelty and life's purpose. But when that bridge crumbles, you're left staring into a gap with no way across. And for many, that's where the modern crisis begins. Not with tragedy, but with the absence of meaning within it. The rituals go on. The holidays continue. The words are still spoken. But something essential is missing. That deep, unshakable sense that your life is part of something larger. You still move through the world, but now the world feels hollow. You still speak the words, but they no longer echo. You're not angry. You're not broken. You're just unconvinced. And in that quiet space where belief used to live, a question begins to take root. If all of this is no longer part of a divine story, then what is it? And what am I supposed to do with it? When religion began to lose its grip, it wasn't rebellion that broke the spell, and it was knowledge. Science didn't shout, it simply observed, measured, explained, and slowly the miracles were replaced by mechanisms. Genesis gave way to evolution. Creation was no longer a divine act. It was a biological process. The heavens didn't open with angels and judgment. They exploded silently in what we now call the Big Bang. For the first time in history, we weren't the center of the universe. We were dust, accidents of time floating on a pale rock around a dying star, in a cosmos that doesn't even know we're here. And there's a strange kind of beauty in that, but also a kind of terror, because science can tell you what things are, how they behave, where they came from, but it can't tell you why it matters. It can't tell you what to live for. It can't tell you how to carry grief, or what to do with a broken heart at 2 a.m. And so, the more we understood the world, the less it seemed to care that we were in it. What we gained in facts we lost in meaning. The sky became a collection of gases, not a realm of gods. The soul became neurons firing in a brain, not something eternal. And death became final. No judgment, no paradise, just the end. For some, this was liberation, freedom from guilt, from dogma, from superstition. But for many, it left something hollow, because now the universe is open, infinite, indifferent, silent. And in that silence we began to hear our own voices echo back, unanswered. Camus understood this better than anyone. He didn't deny science. He didn't mourn the loss of religion. But he did name what remained: absurdity. The feeling of being a conscious being in a world that offers no explanation for your consciousness. The sense that your deepest hopes are met with nothing but empty space. And that dissonance, that tension, is not a mistake. It's the starting point. In the late 1800s, Friedrich Nietzsche looked at the direction the modern world was heading and saw something most people weren't ready to admit. God is dead, he wrote, and we have killed him, not with weapons, not with rage, but with doubt, with the slow, silent turning away from the sacred. For centuries, God had been more than a belief. He was the foundation, the source of morality, of truth, of meaning itself. Even those who didn't practice religion still lived in the shadow of its structure. But Nietzsche saw the cracks forming. He saw that the rise of science, reason, and secular thought wasn't just shifting how we explained the world, it was hollowing out our spiritual center. And what terrified him wasn't the loss of belief. It was the loss of what belief had once anchored. You can remove the idea of God, but what do you replace it with? Nietzsche saw what most people didn't. When the sacred collapses, the vacuum left behind is dangerous, because meaning doesn't disappear quietly. It fights, it clings, and when no higher truth remains to give suffering a shape, we begin to chase substitutes. We fill the silence with distractions. We make gods out of money, out of power, out of status. We worship ideologies that promise redemption without transcendence, movements that demand loyalty but offer no grace. And underneath it all, we still ache for something that feels real. Nietzsche didn't mourn the death of God as a theist. He mourned it as a philosopher, because he knew when the sky goes silent, the soul doesn't celebrate, it trembles. What he feared most wasn't nihilism. It was passive nihilism, a slow decay of the human spirit, where people keep living, keep consuming, keep working, but without any sense of why. A world where we pretend everything is fine while privately drowning in spiritual confusion, where truth is relative, where values are negotiable, where we avoid the question of purpose altogether, because we're terrified the answer might be, there isn't one. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said we'd killed God. Not that humanity had conquered the divine, but that we had severed ourselves from the roots of meaning without building anything worthy in its place. And now we live in the ruins of that collapse. We're told to create our own truth, to follow our passion, to just be yourself. But no one explains what that means when the world no longer points toward anything higher. And here's the tragedy. We still long for meaning with the same intensity. We still grieve. We still love. We still ask the same ancient questions. Why am I here? What does it all mean? What should I do with this life? But instead of turning to the sacred, we turn to screens, to empty affirmations, to curated lives built on curated images, as if meaning can be manufactured through performance. Nietzsche called this the great crisis of modernity. Not that we suffer, but that we no longer know how to suffer. Not that we feel lost, but that no one remembers where we were going in the first place. And so we float, educated but unanchored, free but directionless, connected but deeply, deeply alone. Nietzsche's words weren't just a provocation, they were a warning. When we remove the divine, we don't become gods, we become orphans, and every orphan begins sooner or later to look for a home. Albert Camus would take that inheritance, the death of God, the collapse of meaning, the unbearable silence of existence, and ask the only question that truly mattered. Now that the sky is empty, how do we live beneath it? Albert Camus did not begin with answers. He began with the only question he believed was worth asking: should I kill myself? That was not poetry. It was philosophy in its most honest form. Because once you remove the idea of divine purpose, once you see the sky is empty, and the ground beneath you gives no reason, you are forced to confront what most people spend their lives avoiding. Is life still worth living when it has no meaning? For Camus, this wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. He lived through the Second World War. He saw innocent people shot in the streets, tortured in cells, disappeared by regimes. He saw human beings stripped of dignity not by nature, but by other human beings. And yet he refused to call life meaningless. Instead, he named what he saw: a condition, a confrontation, a conflict between two truths that cannot be reconciled. On one side, the human spirit, desperate for clarity, for justice, for something sacred. And on the other, the cold mechanics of a universe that does not speak, a universe that spins, burns, dies, and expands, indifferent to our cries for meaning. This is the absurd, not a flaw in the world, but a clash between who we are and what the world is. And that clash, Camus said, is not something to solve, but something to live inside. This is where most thinkers diverge. Some insist we must leap toward belief, fill the silence with God or dogma or metaphysical comfort. Others fall into nihilism, dismissing everything as pointless, descending into despair. Camus rejected both. He believed the absurd was not a problem, but a starting point. To be human, he said, is to demand meaning in a universe that offers none, and to continue demanding it, to keep living, thinking, choosing, loving, even when the cosmos remains silent, is an act of rebellion more powerful than any belief system. It is not hope that defines the human condition. It is lucidity, the courage to see the absurd, name it, and remain upright before it. Because in the moment we accept that life has no ultimate meaning, we are no longer prisoners of false hope. We are no longer waiting for life to justify itself. We are free, not in the way that comforts, but in the way that awakens. Free to stop chasing external justification. Free to stop obeying rules written for a world that no longer exists. Free to choose what matters to us, precisely because nothing is imposed from above. This is what Camus called the revolt, not against life, but for it. A conscious, deliberate refusal to surrender to despair. To say, even if life has no higher meaning, I still choose to live it fully, to embrace the absurd and make it beautiful. And that revolt, that quiet defiance, is the beginning of liberation. Because if there is no script, then you are no longer a character, you become the author. And if the universe gives you no answers, you are free to ask better questions. Camus believed that the absurd man, the one who sees the world without illusions and yet refuses to surrender, can be found not in theory, but in myth. A single image captured the absurd condition better than any book ever could. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to tumble back down every time it neared the summit, over and over, forever. No rest, no reward, no ending. It's the cruelest punishment imaginable, a life of effort without achievement, a fate that mocks meaning, a labor that promises nothing. And yet, Camus does something radical. He looks at Sisyphus, trapped in this endless repetition, and he writes the final words of his most famous essay. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Why? Because happiness, in Camus' view, is not the result of success. It's not the fruit of meaning given from above. It is a form of lucidity, a full awareness of one's fate, and the refusal to be broken by it. Sisyphus knows his task is endless. He knows there's no escape, no final moment of glory, but that knowledge doesn't destroy him. It frees him, because now the labor is his, the stone is his. The act of pushing, meaningless in the eyes of the gods, becomes his quiet rebellion. When the illusion of reward is stripped away, what remains is the purity of action. To choose effort not because it will lead somewhere, but because you are alive. And in every step upward you affirm that life, not with words, but with motion. Camus saw in this myth a mirror of modern life. We go to work, we pay bills, we endure disappointments, heartbreaks, failures, and often the same struggles return again and again. No final moment of arrival, no grand revelation, and yet we push. And perhaps the nobility is not in what we reach, but in the fact that we keep reaching, even knowing there may be no final reward. In this, Camus found a definition of freedom that most people miss: to live without appeal, to no longer ask the universe for permission, to carry your stone, fully aware of its weight and yet without bitterness, without delusion, and most importantly, without despair. Sisyphus is not defeated by his task. He owns it, and in that ownership, he transcends it. That, Camus says, is the absurd hero, not the man who escapes the burden, but the one who bears it with open eyes and unbroken will. When Camus asks us to imagine Sisyphus happy, he's not offering comfort. He's offering revolution, because to find joy after the loss of meaning, to keep living, choosing, loving, even after you've seen the emptiness of the sky, that is not naivety, it is power. Most people believe happiness requires purpose. That joy is something given by the world, earned through success, bestowed by love, granted through belief. But Camus turns all of that inside out. He says, the world does not owe you meaning. It does not care about your plans. It will not justify your suffering. And yet you can still choose joy, not because the universe makes sense, but precisely because it doesn't. The moment you stop demanding answers, you become free to create your own rhythm. When you accept that life is absurd, you stop waiting. Waiting for closure, waiting for justice, waiting for some higher voice to explain why things are the way they are. You begin to live without appeal, no longer begging the world for significance. And in that refusal you become something rare, a person who lives as an end in themselves. Not for heaven, not for legacy, not for applause, but simply because you are here, and this moment, this breath, this feeling is yours. Camus never said the absurd makes life easy. He said it makes life yours. That's what most people miss. They want meaning to arrive like a message, written, sealed, delivered. But Camus offers something harder and more honest: responsibility. The freedom to define what matters is also the burden of choosing. You can no longer hide behind fate. You can no longer say, "This is what I was told to believe." You have to face the blank page and write. That's why Camus called this the revolt. Because to live with eyes open, to laugh without reason, to love without guarantees, to work, create, connect, and endure, all while knowing none of it is owed any ultimate meaning, is not weakness. It is courage, and more than that, it is joy. Not the fleeting pleasure of distraction, not the shallow happiness of comfort, but the deep, defiant joy of someone who has faced the void and chosen to live anyway. Camus didn't believe in resignation. He didn't ask you to accept the absurd and grow numb. He asked for something far more difficult and far more human: to rebel, but not in anger, not in destruction, in presence, in persistence. To wake up each morning fully aware that life is fragile, directionless, and brief, and still choose to live it on your own terms. That is rebellion, not the rebellion of revolutionaries, but of individuals who refuse to die before they're dead, who will not surrender their dignity, even when the world offers nothing in return. You are not here to be obedient to a meaningless world. You are here to defy it, not through force, but through freedom. To laugh without needing permission, to feel deeply without apology, to love, to lose, to begin again, knowing that none of it is guaranteed to last. Camus called this revolt because it stands in direct opposition to despair. Where despair says, "Nothing matters, so why bother?" the revolt says, "Nothing is promised, and still I rise." It's not blind optimism. It's not pretending everything is fine. It's the decision to live as if your actions still count, even if the universe never gives you a scoreboard. It's what makes you dangerous in a world built on passive compliance, because the person who doesn't need a cosmic reward to keep going cannot be controlled. They are not chasing approval. They are not waiting for signs. They are not hoping for rescue. They act, they choose, they endure, not for eternity, but for this hour, this body, this breath. That is the power of revolt. Not to conquer the absurd, but to meet it on equal ground. To say, "I see you, I know you, and I'm still here." Camus believed that to live this way is not defeat. It's greatness, a quiet, fearless greatness that asks for nothing, but gives everything. If life has no inherent meaning, then nothing is assigned to you, but also nothing is forbidden. You were not sent here to follow a script. There is no blueprint, no cosmic authority waiting to grade your performance. And that is not a tragedy. That is freedom. Because if the universe owes you nothing, then you owe it nothing in return. You are not bound to fulfill someone else's expectations. You are not required to believe in dreams that aren't yours. You are not condemned to carry stories that no longer speak to you. Camus understood this better than anyone. He didn't offer answers. He offered space. Space to decide for yourself what matters. Space to live without pretending. Space to say, "This may all be absurd, and still, I choose to make it beautiful." The meaning of your life does not exist waiting somewhere to be discovered. It exists only when you create it, and it begins every time you say, "I will not be reduced to nothing by a world that means nothing." You are free to become someone you admire, to build love that feels real, to chase what sets your mind on fire even if no one understands it. And no one, not the gods, not society, not fate, has the right to stop you. That's the quiet power of Camus. He doesn't give you a reason to live. He gives you the courage to live without needing one, because in the end you are the author, and this moment, this brief, uncertain, absurd life, is your one page. You can spend it looking for meaning, or you can choose to write it.